On Being is brought to you by the John Templeton Foundation, harnessing the power of the sciences to explore the deepest and most perplexing questions facing humankind. Learn about the winner of this year's Templeton Prize, Dr. Jane Goodall, whose discoveries changed our understanding of humanity's role in an interconnected world at templeton.org.
The Reverend Jennifer Bailey is a gentle source of my confidence in the human future. She's a young pastor and social innovator, wise before her time. As healers of the healers, she and her colleagues support people to sustain themselves, their communities, and social movements from a place of spirit, creativity, and courage. Across these last years, I've also come to love Jen as a friend of a different generation. She and I both believe that cross-generational accompaniment is essential to meeting this century's callings towards belonging and healing. We draw each other out this hour in that spirit.
There is something about the fact that we are mortal, that there is a definite beginning, middle, and end to the arc of our lives that is at once humbling, but it also frees up so much.
Yeah.
It does allow us to have this generational view that, like, well, I'm here and one day I'm not going to be here. and so I can do what I can do during this time. And at the same time, I can pass on that which came to me as seed, as blossom, and let somebody else plant it and tend to it. And that is so freeing.
Yeah.
And if I could go back and talk to a younger version of myself, I would say it's okay to not build the whole house. It's okay to lay a foundation and be satisfied in that.
Yeah, but it's so great that you can say that to your younger self when you're still only in your 30s. That's kind of evolutionary progress in my mind. I'm Krista Tippett, and this is On Being. Back in 2016, when I first experienced Jen Bailey, she reminded me that the biblical word for apocalypse does not mean, as we throw it around culturally, a cataclysm. It means an uncovering. The organization she founded and leads, Faith Matters Network, has stepped in across the societal ruptures that have been uncovered in our time. She's also on the staff of the Greater Bethel AME Church in Nashville, where she lives. And this exchange came about in partnership with Encore.org, with Jen, who invited it, taking the lead from the first.
Well, you are one of my favorite conversation partners, so I feel so blessed to be able to be in conversation with you today. And, you know, I was thinking about this concept of intergenerational friendship. And I remember the first place I started thinking about it was on the On Being studio couches in Minneapolis. And I think it was 2018 when I was a fellow. And I remember we were all gathered around and you were telling us the story of yourself as a young person. And I think it was West Germany. And the role as during that part of your life when you were doing diplomacy and international relations of intergenerational friendships for grounding you. And so I wonder if you might tell us a story about that time, go back to when you were a young person and the value of those friendships for you.
That's such a good question. I just want to say one thing I remember about you on that couch is that you also took naps, and I realized how tired you were. And I think actually that's related to what we're going to talk about, because I've watched you really lean into the need for care, for self-care, for care for the caregivers. And just think about how between now and 2018, how unimaginably the world has shifted on its axis. Yeah, I don't remember talking about intergenerational, but in Berlin, but it's true that for some reason, I always had a couple of much older friends. And in Berlin, I had two women. One was a journalist, and she was in her 60s when I met her, you know, and I knew her through her 70s, and another woman. And they were just so important to me. It's a long time ago, but that word grounding, is what comes to me. I've thought a lot also, even just kind of in this conversations I've had with the show, and as I get older, I think there is actually something about getting older that you just inhabit your body ever more fully. And I think that that's something that children are attracted to in grandparents, and that we are attracted to in older people. And, when you're in the middle of life, and, you're in that now, you're childbearing, like you're in your body in certain ways incredibly. But there's a presence that it's not something you can talk about. It's not something conscious. It's just, this person is on the earth fully. And there's something so comforting about getting close to that.
I can, as somebody who is a new mom who feels like my body, a new mom who's breastfeeding, in this season, I very much feel like my body is not my own.
Yes.
And I have had, I think you're right. My attraction to hanging out with and being in the presence of either virtually or in person with older folks is sort of that like magnetic attraction of wanting to be around, in particular, women who do seem to inhabit and carry their bodies in a different way. I'm learning things about my body I didn't know. I didn't know it could produce and nourish and feed. I didn't know.
You didn't know it was made for this. I mean, you knew it,
yes.
but you didn't know it.
No, exactly. Yeah. I'm also now about to hit my mid-30s. And so I've heard that your body starts aching in a different way. And,
I don't know. Do yoga. I think that's a self-fulfilling prophecy that one can circumvent.
Okay, I will embrace that because I've started to discover joints and bones and muscles I didn't know existed, lifting up Max, my baby boys.
Yeah.
I know another thing that has been on my mind. So one of the things I love talking to you about is just what's been on my mind lately. And I think emerging out of the past 4 years, I've really been holding closely to this famous prayer that was made upon the sainthood of Oscar Romero. And it says, and begins with the line, "It helps sometimes to take a long view." And coming out of what has felt like the chaos, confusion, the grief that was 2020, I found myself being attracted to those who have a long view of time, particularly elders and those who are older. And I wonder, particularly in a time where everything seems urgent, what the role of pause and breath is in this season, to help us gear up for whatever this transformational moment we find ourselves in is. And so I'm curious if there have been spaces or places in your own life where taking a long view of time has been helpful.
Yeah. Well, that's something I've really, really just walked with. I think part of that, for me, it's very much a spiritual view of time. It's a biblical view of time. It's the long arc of the moral universe view of time.
Right.
And it's in fact a scientific view of time. But I think for me, it actually comes from my geopolitical youth, because I think it really got planted in me from living in divided Berlin in the 1980s on what really was the fault line of the world at that time. The great drama that seemed like, that it might spell the end of humanity at that time. There's ways in which we are now reckoning with things that didn't get reckoned with in the 20th century because of the Cold War. So I see the scope of the Cold War. I think the excesses of American capitalism, I think the Cold War also was when we started to equate the market with moral good, with moral superiority. And that's so deep. That's so in our DNA now. So I see the Cold War in all of its dimensions, but to have had the experience to live on its fault line, we all knew things were shifting. There was a fluidity that was new, but nobody would have predicted that the wall would fall so quickly and that the world would upend and change so transformatively. So I feel like I lived through this moment of experiencing a global before and after. But what I see, what has shaped me, is seeing how much we didn't see. Like seeing how much was possible that we weren't taking in. And I mean really all of us. So I take a generational view of time, but that also means that I understand that time doesn't work on our schedules. It doesn't work like this bully that we treat it as. Real transformation is generations in the making, and yet things can also happen quickly, right? It's moving quickly and slowly at the same time. I'm curious if for you, this 2020 and beyond feels like a before and an after.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about what are my Berlin Wall moments throughout the course of my lifetime, because I have no conscious memory of the wall falling. No. I think maybe it was 1 or 2 years old.
I was going to say, were you even alive?
And when I think about sort of the before and after moments that have defined the arc of my life as a millennial, and now as I'm settling into that an in-between generation space, which has been really beautiful in many ways. I think about 9/11 as one of those moments for me as a young person that sort of shifted my consciousness and awareness around the interconnectivity of global dynamics. Some of those things that were not quite uncovered coming to bear. 9/11 was my first week of high school. So there was a distinct before and after alongside, what a time to have that kind of before and after as a young person emerging into adolescence. I think about the uprisings in Ferguson in 2014 as a before and after moment of reckoning with racial justice issues. And now 2020 very much feels like a before and after moment, both because of what it revealed about the common fate of humanity as we were all battling this common enemy in the coronavirus, and the death of George Floyd, and just seeing from that moment in 2014 to the moment in 2020, the shift. And so to your point, while it very much feels like that moment was generations in the making, that the response, the uprisings were generations in the making, the shift from the term Black Lives Matter being controversial in 2014 to it being chanted globally in 2020 was just such a tremendous, not just shift, but like worldview change that I saw unfolding before me. And so I find myself with a great deal of curiosity, both about what we're learning on the other end of 2020 and the apocalypse is yet to come, the uncoverings yet to come, because I do think as the world is slowly beginning to open back up in certain places, certainly here in the United States, there are so many things that we aren't thinking about quite yet. I think we've rushed to a space in some places of celebration, forgetting that over 500,000 people have perished or are no longer with us, that there are families that don't have parents and children who are going to have to make their way in the world. And as a new mom who welcomed a 2020 baby, I'm so curious the impact of being sheltered in place with Max for the first 4 or 5 months of his life. My baby, who's now 9 months old, the fact that for the first, 9 months, he mostly saw people with masks. Like, I think eyes have not seen and ears have not heard, right? Yeah. The long-term impact of that on the kids who were born last year. And so I'm entering into this next phase on the other side with a great deal of curiosity and perhaps tenderness, wanting to hold each other tight, because I think that there are ramifications of last year that have yet to be felt. And that can be scary for folks. Yeah. The fear of the unknown is very real. So I'm sitting with all of that in my body right now.
I've always found you so wise about attending to the breadth of experience. you are a pastor, right? It's a pastoral sensibility. I mean, I feel like that question that you asked me, I feel you really embody of seeing that the work that is upon us has been long in coming, and it is the work of the rest of our life. I mean, it's funny. I remember when I first was studying the Bible when I went to seminary, because I wasn't religious for a while, but reading the story of how Moses doesn't make it to the promised land and thinking that was such a wrong ending. Okay. I mean, I was just like, why did they, that doesn't make any sense. And now that I'm 60 and we're in this world we're in, I feel that so clearly at what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I will not see, the end, the final fruits of, and that is fine. And it's the way of things. But I'm also partly able to just embrace that because I see you, right? I want to, if part of what I have to do is figure out how I can walk alongside you and be of service.
Yeah, I'm sitting on that reflection of the image of Moses not entering the promised land. And I think an 18-year-old Jen would, like you, have been very dissatisfied by that conclusion to the story. Like, you mean I did all this work and I can't even see it? Right. I can't see it. Or I can't enter it, I should say. And I've been reflecting a lot lately about what has it been about my life experience that has helped me see this long view at a relatively young age.
Yeah.
And I think it's been my proximity to death. Having lost my mom at 28 when she was 63 years old, having lost 3 or 4 friends, all women of color, to suicide in my early 20s. 2 weeks after I gave birth, one of my best friends from high school died unexpectedly. And experience of walking with my mom her last few months on earth when she was, after battling cancer for 14 years, and walking with her and alongside her and feeding her and changing her and caring for her and loving for her and being in the room when she transitioned. I think those experiences throughout the course of my life have allowed me an insight into just how precious and finite and short life can be. Mm-hmm. And so the question then becomes, if our time on earth is not guaranteed, it's okay to just do what we can do while we're here and enjoy it while we have it. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how much that might be reflected generationally with other folks, in particular of young Black folks in the U.S. who have grown up alongside and are coming behind me, who have seen death literally become spectacle in front of our eyes. This constant encounter with death via social media, whether it be, police shootings or other things that are now just right in front of our eyes. And given that we live in a culture in the U.S. that does not do death well, we like to shut it down and forget it in any case. Yeah. I wonder if emerging out of this 2020 movement, there might be a reinterrogation of how we sit with death and grief, not as like just something that is sad that we dwell in, right?
Yeah. Well, it's also, we don't dwell with the fact of mortality.
I think that's it. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that we live and then we die. And I think it was Toni Morrison who once said that, like, that might be the point of it all, right? That there is something about the fact that we are mortal, that there is a definite beginning, middle, and end to the arc of our lives that is at once, I think the word that I want to use is humbling, but it also frees up so much. Yeah. It does allow us to have this generational view that, like, well, I'm here and one day I'm not going to be here.
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and so I can do what I can do during this time, and at the same time, I can pass on that which came to me as seed, as blossom, and let somebody else plant it and tend to it. And that is so freeing.
Yeah.
And if I could go back and talk to a younger version of myself, I would say it's okay to not like build the whole house. It's okay to lay a foundation.
Yeah.
And be satisfied in that.
Yeah, but it's so great that you can say that to your younger self when you're still only in your 30s. That's kind of evolutionary progress in my mind.
I think it might be one of our gifts as
I think
millennials.
It is. I think it's a gift of of millennials. But at the same time that you say that, you and your community are really holding the great civilizational challenges and crises. There are layers, there's nuance to what you just said. Because on the one hand, you can do what you can do. And I think you're also saying we must rest, we must love, we must laugh. That's what I wish I had been able to say to myself. I didn't have permission for that. But you're saying it. You're also saying it because I feel like you all see and you feel in your bodies, this is where it feels like an evolutionary advance to me, that you are working with an inheritance of problems is too small a word, but problems and possibilities, unrealized possibilities. An inheritance of, where you can count decades, you can count centuries, right?
Yeah.
And that you are all picking that up and you are going to carry it forward in this generation. And another reason you need to stay rested is not just to be humble about the contribution you can make, but because you see that you are engaged in this huge work.
I think one reason for that, I can only speak from the particularity of my experience, but it was witnessing so many women in my mother's generation just be so tired and worn down. And I think it might have been a result of sort of this second wave of feminism that pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And the cognitive dissonance, I might argue that particularly the Black women in my life my mom was the first in her immediate family to go to college, right?
Yeah.
Holding that tension of the sort of societal expectation or pressure of you can have it all, you can have it all, you can have it all. And in a post-integration space. So my mom grew up in a segregated community in Southern Illinois, alongside sort of this ancestral way of knowing that particularly as a Black woman, and your labor might be exploited and you're expected to hold the entirety of your family and your community on your back. And in my less generous, more angry days where I so desperately want to pick up the phone and call her and ask a question about mothering, then knowing I can't do that, I get mad. I get really, really mad about the fact that she felt that pressure to carry the weight of her community on her back. And I wonder what implications that had for her long-term health. And so I wonder if part of the shifting and prioritization of rest and nurture and care is because we have inherited a legacy in some cases of overwork, of seeing the deathly consequences of quote unquote productivity.
Yeah.
And I also am carrying a curiosity of what the generational shift will be then for those who are coming behind us. So if this might be, one of the contributions of this moment of the work that I'm up to and so many of my colleagues are up to about reprioritizing care and healing and spaces for nurture and movements for social change, there's always going to be a response to that. And so I'm curious what the response to that is. If one day, God willing, prayers up, fingers crossed, there's a time where every movement organization in the United States has a chaplain on staff who is attending to the spiritual, holistic
Right.
well-being of a person, right? I would argue every organization has somebody on staff that is doing that tender work. Then what is the contribution or pushback on that will come, because that will help refine it even more, right?
Yeah.
So I'm carrying both the wisdom of the lineage of which I'm a part of, and like the need for that intervention, and a great deal of curiosity about like, how's my kid going to rebel against me in this space, right? Like, what is he going to say, right?
Well, that doesn't make you special, okay? That dynamic is its time.
Exactly. And how is that pushback going to push us forward?
Yeah.
I have this theory that millennials were called to be cartographers, to be map makers at a time when, institutions were crumbling, the world was shifting in completely different ways.
Yeah.
And so we were creating blueprints or trying to survey the land and understand it. And that the folks who are coming behind me in Gen Z, man, they are builders. They have this like no nonsense way of cutting through things, and a fierce sense of urgency that I both honor and respect, and I worry about for them.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think they are facing so many existential crises at once, and they haven't quite had enough of the time or experience to know that they don't have to answer those questions all at once. But they're coming in with a sophistication and a nuance that I think is the stuff of building the new infrastructure, whether that be spiritual infrastructure or physical infrastructure of our time. And so I'm excited to see.
After a short break, more with Reverend Jen Bailey.
Support for On Being with Krista Tippett comes from the Fetzer Institute, helping build the spiritual foundation for a loving world. Fetzer's new study, What Does Spirituality Mean to Us?, reveals how spirituality informs our understanding of ourselves and each other, and inspires us to take action for the common good. Explore these findings and more at spiritualitystudy.org.
I'm Krista Tippett, and this is On Being. Today, in a moment in which so many of us are pondering what the past year has planted in us and who we will be moving forward, I'm with Reverend Jennifer Bailey. She is a leader and innovator in creating spiritual sustainability and community for changemakers and faith leaders and activists engaged in the long-haul work of generative social transformation. Jen is taking the conversational lead here as part of an ongoing cross-generational friendship she and I began years ago.
I want to talk to you about what we think of the role of our sacred wisdom traditions in this particular moment of rupture, and what they might offer us in this season by way of, we can call it spiritual technology. We can just call it ways of being and knowing. Because when I turn on the news or scroll through my timeline on my phone, I see a lot of brokenhearted people who are being attracted to ideologies as new theologies and ways of understanding themselves in the world. And I can't help but think that these traditions that have been around for centuries and millennia might have something to say to us about what it means to be together.
Yeah.
Because I think that is the great question of the 21st century, is how we are together.
Yeah, absolutely. You may have heard me say this. I think the questions that I started pursuing in my work are these ancient questions of what does it mean to be human, and how do we want to live, and who will we be to each other? And I think our great traditions arose to address those questions. they're universal human questions. And this is just another way to say what you just said to me. In the 21st century, the question of what it means to be human is inextricable from the question of who we will be to each other. And I think how we meet that question is really going to be the difference between whether we find ways to flourish or just survive. And what's been so present for me in this last year in particular is how I'm just feeling so clearly that words and notions and approaches that only exist in religious tradition are exactly what people are wanting to talk about and, approach, like redemption and repair and lamentation, right? I mean, when you said we don't know how to accept mortality, we don't know how to work with death, we don't know how to live with our grief, but walk into a future, right?
Yeah.
Forgiveness and atonement. Repentance is another one.
Yeah.
There's just the language we have for this comes from these places, these repositories, this part of the human enterprise where we have been asking across generations who God might be, and that's a way of asking who we are and what we pay homage to and what really matters and who we'll be to each other. And even the language of mindfulness, right?
Yeah.
It's really fascinating, having started with a show called Speaking of Faith near the turn of the century. And that was a hard sell. And finding that we come kind of full circle in my lifetime, not to an embrace of the forms of the tradition with which I grew up, or even with which you grew up, but of the heart of these aspects of the heart of it.
Yeah. It's almost like there's been this moment of recognizing the challenges before us can't just be legislated out of. They can't just be tended to with these other facets of civic life that we've leaned so heavily on, that part of what is before us are spiritual questions, are questions, as you're saying, that go back to the essence of being human. And I wonder, as somebody who is clergy in a Christian tradition, about my role generationally of excavating, of composting the best of what we know about our traditions, and also leading people through a healing process, recognizing that those institutions have also caused a great deal of hurt and harm, particularly for younger folks. And so it's been so powerful to me to see this move of folks seeking to recover these old ways of knowing and being, whether it be like the young people I know who build ritual altars as part of their social justice practice, or folks who are asking these questions about what it looks like to repair after harm in a way that doesn't center punishment, doesn't center a particular sort of carceral understanding of rupture and repair. And that's what gets me excited and leads me into a space of what I think about as like radical hope, rooted hope that is not like detached from the present reality and challenges before us. But I see these promises on the horizon of folks who are asking these big questions, even if that is not the narrative that is most dominant or loudest. It's the one that I see as people are considering the question of what wants to emerge in this season and what is already blooming beautifully. There's a lot of focus, I think, on what is dysfunctional or what is not working or what is tearing us apart.
Yeah, you're talking to me, a journalist.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm aware of that, yes.
Right. And if we quiet down and listen and look long enough, I think we can see these seedlings, not just growing, but flourishing in this moment as we ask these big questions.
I'm Krista Tippett, and this is On Being. Today, exploring belonging and healing in the world ahead in cross-generational friendship with Reverend Jen Bailey. You've been in a dialogue with and in relationship with civil rights elders, and we've been in relationship with some of the same ones, Ruby Sales. I mean, the civil rights movement, of course, had this incredible spiritual ground. Mm-hmm. But the thrust of those movements in the 60s and 70s was the accomplishments that we look back on were secular, right? They were the passage of laws. And I feel like even that generation of civil rights leaders were people of their time, right? And so there was really this faith, and I think that's an accurate word, that if you change the laws, you would change the society. And also, I've heard so many stories, and I'm sure you have too, of the spiritual depletion that came after those years of the peak of the movements. And when I watch you and your I actually do like this Cold War word, your comrades, your community. I feel like you are really offering a corrective. Whether you just kind of were born knowing this or whether it was passed on consciously, you're picking up that experience. And of course, there was so much good that came in those communities and in those people and in those movements. It's kind of like what you said to me a minute ago about, how will the people coming after you both push back on and improve on what you're doing? And I actually see you doing that so beautifully, and not in a spirit of we're going to get this better, but actually in a spirit of reverence for those elders and all that was carried and all that was created, and sort of insisting that while the work is important, the exhaustion it cannot be expected, cannot be necessary.
Yeah, I think it's we carry a great deal of reverence for our elders and enough respect for them to see them as the complete human beings they are. Yeah. I think there's this way in which we talk about relationships with elders that we sort of default to almost like this elevation to sainthood of elders that really does a disservice to seeing their full humanity and the places where they got it wrong, right? Or the spaces where we might push them a little bit further in their thinking around issues that they just hadn't considered. And I think part of what I have been reflecting on lately is that those elders from the Southern Freedom Movement were able to diagnose the issues and challenges before them with the tools they had. And just in the same way that medical technology has advanced dramatically over the past 50 or 60 years, so too, I think our lens towards evaluating what's at the heart of the challenges before us, the heart of these moments of rupture, and the possibility of repair, the technologies are simply different. And so the viewpoint is different. And so it may be that we are looking at the same long-term disease, but that we have a new set of tools to evaluate some of the symptoms. And so I say all that to say, as I think about the relationships that I have been able to forge with elders, both within my faith tradition and outside, and friendships that I've been able to form. There's just been this great deal of acknowledgement when you ask people and see them as human, right? And ask them the deep questions and probe and push in a deeply respectful way of the places where folks feel like they got it wrong or they couldn't quite see because they just didn't have the lens to see. And so I think this pattern of the need for rest and renewal and community and care and pause, not as a way of deflecting from the challenges before us, but as as an integral part of the work of what it means to stay in it. Because I think they did see what burnout did, even though they might not have called it burnout at the time. They did see the limitations of the tools that they had, and the exhaustion and the heart attacks, right? The addiction that emerged out of those spaces because there just weren't the same type of tools to cope.
I remember John Lewis saying to me, we created the beloved community among ourselves, right? Within the movement, we were the beloved community. And that was also cross-racial community.
Yeah.
I really do believe that, as you say, with the tools, with also just the things we're starting to understand about how our brains work. I mean, that equation of change a law, change the society does not contain a sophisticated understanding of the human condition.
Right.
Or what we know from neuroscience now. I mean, how do you really change habits and how much we're walking around with that's unreflected, that's unself-conscious? They didn't know that. And I really feel like the audacious possibility of this century that, again, at best, you will stand on my shoulders every once in a while and I won't see it. I won't get there. But is actually for creating the beloved community. I mean, that's the question, right? That's the theological way to say, I think you started this conversation with our belonging. And let's call it beloved community. And so they had the language and they started it.
Yes.
And we have other ways to get there. You do.
Yes. Yes. And I can hear the cynics, the pragmatists in my ear who would say, wow, you all are having such a Pollyanna-ish conversation about beloved community. Don't you know that white supremacy is on the rise? And don't you know X, Y, and Z? And I hear that. And to those folks, I would say, what I can just hear the church mother saying to me as a young girl in the kitchen of our church, whenever I would complain about something, which is, baby, just keep living. Baby, just keep living. Right? And that, coming out of the mouths of women who were born in the Great Depression, right? Who saw so much and who faced so much, and many of whom lived through the horrors of Jim and Jane Crow. Yeah. That impulse to just keep living is actually revolutionary, right? Revolutionary. In a world that would tear you down or kill you, just keep living.
Yeah, I worry about that too. I not only hear that cynic, I that's in me too. And it's whatever sounds idealistic or aspirational, what you and I also understand when we speak that way is that you throw your life at it. It's not an idea. Yes. It's not an abstraction. It's your job to make it not an abstraction. But also there was a day when I was really doubting this and challenging myself, and I opened up Patrisse Culler's book, When They Call You a Terrorist.
Yeah.
I think on the first page, she refers to that discovery in our lifetime, our generation, that we are made of stardust, and she reflects on her ancestors and all that they survived and suffered. And she kind of ends this paragraph. It's a beautiful paragraph. She says, what could they be? But what could they have been but stardust to accomplish all of that?
I love that image. I'm going to sit with it for a second.
I'll send you that passage.
Yes, please. Yeah. Please do. I want to hold that close. I want to hold that very close. In the moments that it feels scary, and the moments when it feels like we're at an end, holding on to that image of us as stardust feels like the only way to help us get through. Yeah. So I think that is also the question of the most immediate question is how we get through this moment and how we continue to get through it. I think the answer is only in community with other stardust beings.
Yeah.
Oh man. Can we talk all the time, Krista?
You can talk as much as you want. I do want to say to you before we finish just what a joy it's been to watch you become a mother.
Thank you.
It's so thrilling for me to watch this, even though I haven't seen you in the flesh and I haven't seen Max in the flesh, but even from afar, I don't know. It's, it kind of just, all these things we're talking about the passage of time and the generations and what we inherit and what we, how we send others forth and what we transmit. And to watch that incarnate, to use a religious word, in you becoming a mother, and the delight that little boy is, that just comes through pixels, it just jumps out on the computer screen, and you and Ira making that family together. It's just been amazing. I love that. I love actually being. I told you about I've always had elders, but to be the elder and then to have this experience is a real gift.
Thank you for not minding being on the receiving end of many a photo text message and not minding me sharing pictures. And I remember before Max was born, you offered a blessing to our family that was around this notion of transfiguration. And I have held that so closely to me as I've begun to emerge into whatever this version of my life and personhood is. Those words of comfort are words that I've leaned into as I've seen myself be transfigured in all of these different ways. So thank you for not minding the overwhelming, sometimes annoying, like messages about my baby.
No annoyance in it.
Oh, thank you, Krista, for this time. It just feels so sweet and so gentle.
Blessings,
so loving.
Jen, and one day I'll see you again.
Yeah, one day soon. I'm going to make it happen.
Okay.
It's going to happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen Bailey is founder and executive director of the Faith Matters Network. She also serves on the staff of Greater Bethel AME Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Her first book will be published in October 2021, and you can order it now. It's called To My Beloveds: Letters on Faith, Race, Loss, and Radical Hope. And this conversation came about in partnership with Encore.org, an organization that brings together older and younger changemakers to solve problems, bridge divides, and create a better future. A shorter version of the conversation I had with Jen was part of a video event called Co-Generate, which you can find online. The On Being Project is
Chris Hegel,
Loren Drummerhausen,
Aaron Colasacco,
Eddie Gonzalez,
Lillian Vo,
Lucas Johnson,
Suzette Burley,
Zach Rose,
Colleen Scheck,
Julie Seipel,
Gretchen Honnold,
Jale Akavan,
Rodrigo Tuama,
Ben Cott,
Gautam Srikishan,
Lily Benowitz,
April Adamson,
Ashley Herr,
and Matt Martinez.
The On Being Project is located on Dakota land. Our lovely theme music is provided and composed by Zoe Keating. And the last voice that you hear singing at the end of our show is Cameron Kinghorn. On Being is an independent, nonprofit production of the On Being Project. It is distributed to public radio stations by WNYC Studios. I created this show at American Public Media. Our funding partners include the Fetzer Institute, helping to build the spiritual foundation for a loving world. Find them at fetzer.org. Calliopeia Foundation, dedicated to reconnecting ecology, culture, and spirituality, supporting organizations and initiatives that uphold a sacred relationship with life on Earth. Learn more at calliopeia.org. The George Family Foundation, in support of the Civil Conversations Project. The Osprey Foundation, a catalyst for empowered, healthy, and fulfilled lives. The Charles Koch Institute's Courageous Collaborations Initiative, discovering and elevating tools to cure intolerance and bridge differences. The Lilly Endowment, an Indianapolis-based private family foundation dedicated to its founders' interests in religion, community development, and education. And the Ford Foundation, working to strengthen democratic values, reduce poverty and injustice, promote international cooperation, and advance human achievement worldwide.
On Being is produced by On Being Studios in Minneapolis, Minnesota.